Okay, welcome back to the Orchestra podcast, everybody. I have on one of my top 10 favorite people in music on today, Dr. Quinton Morris. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Could you just tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now before we start the discussion about what you're doing now? So how'd you get to
Sure.
here?
Man, gosh, that's such a loaded question, but I'll try to summarize it. So started playing violin when I was 8 years old, played in the public schools, of course, played my middle school and high school orchestras. It's interesting because I'm originally from Chicago, the Chicago area, and we moved here my freshman year of high school to the Pacific Northwest. And the orchestra program at my high school, I'll just say I was not feeling very challenged. And so I went to my guidance counselor at school, and I'm going somewhere with this story. I went to my guidance counselor during my freshman year, asked him if there were other options for me to play violin. At that time, there was the Renton Youth Symphony, because I lived in Renton, and it was actually a very good orchestra. John Zoltak was the conductor who now conducts Great Rapids Symphony.
Okay.
And it was a great orchestra, and I got involved in that. And I didn't have a private lesson teacher, but my guidance counselor found this program at the University of Washington where high school students could go and take like advanced placement at that time. This is pre-Running Star. I'm dating myself. Anyway.
Is that still back in the Sokol days?
Kind of, yeah. Well, Sokol had retired at that point. So he was, we're talking like early 90s. So Sokol had retired, or maybe he wasn't conducting the top orchestra. So he had already retired.
Okay.
Anyway, so my guidance counselor found this program at UW. I got accepted for academics to do this summer program. And my guidance counselor said, hey, why don't you go to UW and also take lessons and you should take some music courses while you're there. And I was like, yeah. So at that time, the violin professor at UW was Walter Schweed, who at that time was the associate concertmaster of Seattle Symphony. And so I went and I played for Mr. Schweed, and he accepted me as a student into the program. Well, I took lessons with him during the summer and then just continued through high school. And because there was really no violin teacher in all of South King County that I could go and study with, there was just really no one around during that time. So that's kind of my journey. From high school, I took lessons with him, and then of course, played in Seattle Youth Symphony as well. And then went off to college. I never intended to actually go into music. I knew that music would be a part of my life in some sort of capacity. So I knew that I was going to play violin for a long time. I just, I didn't know how. But when I got to college, I had a teacher. I went to school for pre-law. In New Orleans at Xavier. Really enjoyed that program, but had a violin teacher who literally changed my life. And she used to say to me, if you practice just a little bit more, you could actually be really good. And if you want to have a career in music, you got to work real hard, but I think you could do it. I think you have the stomach to, plow through having a music career. And so she encouraged me to go to the Brevard Music Center, which I did that summer. That was an epic summer.
A lot of people, they hear about Interlochen, they hear about Aspen. I did Round Top at some point, but Brevard, There are
Oh,
amazing things happening in Brevard, and
I,
people
I
are
went to
calling on Brevard. That is
Brevard.
the place to go.
I've been to Brevard twice, and both times I made lifelong friends at Brevard
Hmm.
and had an incredible time. Um, and so the first time I went to Brevard Music Center, I knew that music was my calling, and I knew that that was something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So at the end of my junior year at Xavier, I left and transferred to the North Carolina School of the Arts, totally against my parents' wishes, totally against. I mean, I had one more year of college left, and it was incredibly risky, but I knew that I needed to go. So I left and then worked my way literally up. I went to the North Carolina School of the Arts, and then I graduated from there. It was tough because I had to get a full-time job because they didn't. At Xavier, I had a full scholarship.
Yeah.
I left a full scholarship to pursue music, and then went on and did my master's at the Boston Conservatory, and then my doctorate at University of Texas, Austin. And now I do a lot of things. I'm, professor at Seattle University where I teach violin and chamber music. And I have a violin studio. And then I run a program called Key to Change, which provides violin lessons to middle and high school students in the South King County area.
And the Key to Change is like exactly what we were all missing when we were in school. And it's like every time I see a post from you about Key to Change, I'm like, why didn't we have this when I was in school? Because I did not realize how privileged that I was as a kid. Like you talked about where you had to audition just to be accepted as a private student.
Yeah.
My parents set that stuff up for me. I didn't know that first lesson was an audition. I had no idea.
Well, that's interesting because my parents didn't know either. My parents didn't know really, what it means to, take private lessons, or I mean, we didn't even know that that was really an option. I just happened to have a pretty savvy guidance counselor who
this person sounds like a saint. I don't know if they're still around or if they're still
he's around, and
what an amazing human being sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't getting fulfilled in my high school orchestra, and I was ready to quit. That's what happened.
Really?
I was going to quit. Yeah. And he's like, no, 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 no. Let's look at all of our options. And I mean, my guidance counselor at that time was a jock. Like he was like, he like coached the men's or the boys basketball team. He was like 6'5". Like he was living vicariously through all the boys because he loved basketball. But I think he saw something in me, and he respected the discipline of arts. And I think that's where music
is very similar that way. Both
similar.
My parents were coaches. I mean, well,
yeah.
My mom was a musician. My stepdad was a hardcore basketball coach.
Right.
And so that waking up every Saturday and running 7 miles, whether you want to or not, is the same as my teacher throughout high school, and then well, that's a whole nother story, but then into college, Sven Ronning.
Oh yeah.
Was the Dorothy DeLay approach is like you could break it down and make it less time, but any way you slice it, it was 5 hours. You got to find like a teacher that I'm sure you're familiar with. Is Houston? Is that her name? Is that who I'm thinking of? In Seattle, teaches the little kids.
You're talking about Jan Coleman.
I think so. Well, whoever I'm thinking of sits down and literally with the students marks down how many times a day do you go to the bathroom, how much time you spend eating.
I don't know if Jan does that, but I don't know. I think that's a little weird. Like,
but the point of it is how much time is really available in your day for practicing, and it's quite a bit. And especially,
it's interesting because with practicing, and this people don't teach you how to practice.
Yes.
You know,
Yes,
a lot
yes,
of
yes.
people, they don't teach you how to practice, and there's different types of practicing.
Uh-huh.
There's obviously the physical component of
But
practicing.
that's not it. There's so much
No,
more
there's
that
so much more. There's
you're
the
gonna burn
mental.
out doing this all day.
Well, you know, I'm telling you, like my first time at Carnegie Hall, I did a recital with a very respected soprano who at that time was at the Metropolitan Opera quite regularly, Indra Thomas. And I remember, you know, as string players, we're just like, okay, let's do it again and again and again and again and again. And with the vocalist, you can't do that because you'll wear their voice out. And I learned, they call it marking, where a singer will basically say the words and do the articulations without actually singing full voice.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really an incredible practice tool, where, and I do this with my beginners, especially, of just actually saying the pitch names out loud or putting words with the rhythm, practice the enunciation or practice the articulation. So there's lots of different ways that one can practice. It doesn't have to always be physical. There's, of course, sitting down with your music, studying the score. So like, you know, there was a point in my career where I was doing a ton of traveling. So I would sit with the score. I would, you know, mentally practice studying, you know, the score. If I was playing a concerto with an orchestra, you know, trying to understand, okay, how does my part fit in with the oboes if I'm playing a Mozart concerto, or how does it fit in with the strings? Or
and we got a whole symphony orchestra in our pocket, pretty much everybody right now.
Yeah.
So if you're on a plane, just going to just see your auntie, you can have the score out in front of you and be listening to it. And if you want to go that extra mile, you can get those accompaniment tracks where you just hear the accompaniment while you're looking at your part.
Absolutely.
And you can be ideating your solo part. I mean, that's the next level practicing.
Right.
But it's not this practicing.
That's right. That's right. And I think that all of those things are viable to you becoming a very well-rounded musician. So I think there's the practice element, there's the mental, there's singing. I know a lot of kids don't like to sing, but like, you can't play Mozart if you're not.
You just got to get over it. You got to just
you just got to sing. And the thing is, the reason why we sing is for a couple of reasons. One is we're internalizing the music. There's that. There's also the vocal component, which, I mean, as string players, the violin was created to imitate the human voice.
Yep.
So there has to be a vocal lyrical component to your playing.
I really struggled with that when I was in high school.
Well,
and then in college. Well, I mean, I sang, but I really struggled with why do we need to sing?
Well, you know why that is? It's all ego. It's all ego, because we're not singers, right? And so to have to sing in front of your peers or in front of your friends can be a little intimidating. And so I know if my students, a lot of them, you know, I have to sing, and I'm like, yeah, we're all singing. You're able to express the characters. You're able to really hear the nuances using your voice. And so I tell my students all the time, look, I'm a terrible singer, but I have to sing this because I really want to get to the crux of what this music is really all about.
What finally made it click for me, and it was like so backwards and not even related to like why we sing, but absolutely everything about why you need to sing. So Sven would make me take lessons with other people over the summer when I was in college, which looking back on was so great to have a different opinion on the same piece of music that I'm going to come back to in the fall. And so I'm taking lessons with Leonid Kalin, and he says so little, but like there's so much meaning in every little word. And I'm fishing for this. I was playing oh, I think it was the first movement of the second Vinyavsky concerto, and I was fishing for some high note, and he walked up and he like grabbed my bow while I'm playing to like stop me, and he looks at me and he points in his ear and he says, "You hear before you play."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I was kind of upset at the time, and I felt like it was a really bad lesson, and I went home kind of discouraged. And then I figured it out. We sing because you need to be able to hear the next note before you've played it. If you don't know what the next note sounds like, you will not play it right. That's why we sing. I mean, among all the other reasons of getting the affect and the feeling and the emotion.
Yeah, there's two things that students don't like to do: sing, and the second is record. You've got to record.
Oh, it hurts so much, but you have to.
But you know what I do with my students is I treat class like sports team. So if you're on a sports team, you're reviewing film. You're watching film of your performance, of the team's performance. You're watching film of your opponent that you're getting ready to compete against to find out like what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. And so what I do is tell my students the reason why we watch film is not to feel like we're humiliating ourselves and not to feel like, you know, this is an extra step that we have to do. It's because we just really want to be better. We want to be better players.
Well, and it expands your scope of awareness.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you've got to still record yourself. I record myself. And
all the time.
I released a little snippet on Facebook the other day of me playing Beethoven, and right before and right after the snip that I put up, my bow hand was just like straight out like that, just like totally straight fingers. What was I thinking? How could I not? But now, because I watched that video, now I go back and I have more awareness and, you know, keep those fingers curled, and especially in that spot, because you go back and you watch the tape,
and
you see that that's the spot where it happens every time. Now you're gonna catch it.
And you know, I think the other part of it is that that by recording yourself, it's a teaching tool. It's teaching you how to analyze your own personal practice. It's incredibly important, you know. I know I went through a period where I felt like, okay, if I go to this teacher, they're gonna fix me and I'm just to become a really brilliant player, when that's just not true. You go to the teacher to learn more of how to teach yourself. And that's something that it took me a really long time to figure that part out. You know,
somebody that I had a couple of lessons with, and I'm sure you've heard the stories. Ken Goldsmith down at Rice.
Yeah, I almost went to study with Ken.
When you have a lesson with Ken, he breaks out the Betamax. Maybe he's upgraded to something digital now, but you had a tape.
Now.
Really? Oh, congratulations, Ken! If you're watching, congratulations on retirement. And would record your lesson, and he may not say very much in the whole lesson, and you can feel like, what did I just pay for if he didn't say anything to me? But you go back and you watch the tape, and like the 3 things he said, you see it every 10 seconds in the tape. And then you go back and you practice and you watch the tape again, and that tape is gold. It's worth every penny that you gave Ken Goldsmith.
Yeah. I really respect him. Yeah, he was at Rice, and I wound up going to the University of Texas, but he was somebody that I really respect, and I had a lot of friends who studied with Ken. So.
Well, and just the pool of success around him, his colleagues and his students, is just tremendous.
Oh yeah.
Well, in the same way, I think Brian Lewis is becoming Ken Goldsmith in a beautiful way, because he's just such a sweetie. I mean, I have never heard from a student of his that like left crying or felt like they were going to quit. It was, even on the roughest lesson, was like, you know what? I think I know how to fix this. So,
you know,
so kudos to Brian.
Yeah, when I was at UT, I think Brian is a brilliant Suzuki teacher.
Uh-huh.
I think that is really where he really thrives, and I think that's where he's very inspiring.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is the Suzuki method, which I really respect him for. Um, I was thankful that I studied with Daniel Ching, who was the first violinist of the Mural Quartet,
Yep.
and I was actually his first student, and his first doctoral student he had ever taught, and his first student at UT.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and that was really
What a relationship to have. You'll have that forever.
I have that forever. I was the first, and to I think both of our credit, his first student who won a job, and our time together was very intense, to say the least. It was very intense, and I think because we both have very alpha male personalities, that when we were like, when we were going for it, and when we clashed, we clashed. But I think we both came away from that circumstance relieved, exhausted, and proud. And when I look back on that time, I'm so thankful that I had it, because it has shaped me into the type of musician, artist, teacher that I am today. And like I said, I mean, he was tough. And I think I also learned during that time, I don't know, I always gravitated, since your students are gonna watch this, I'll just kind of go out there and say this, that I always gravitated towards the teachers who were super demanding, who were really tough, and that students avoided. I did. Because I felt like if they were really tough, if they were really demanding, there has to be a reason behind it. If they're really demanding and they're in the positions that they're in, they had to have had a really high standard for themselves in order to be where they were.
Absolutely.
So that was just kind of my MO. I always, I know a lot of students, especially, when you're in high school or even when you're in college, you are like, oh, I'm gonna avoid that teacher because God, they give so much work and they're
Why would you avoid that opportunity to learn?
Because not everybody who goes to college is going to learn. And that's just the truth. We like to say that everybody who goes to college is going because they really want to learn, but some people go to college because they don't know what else to do with their self, or they're going because they feel that there's this sense of pressure from their parents or trying to impress their friends. So, they apply to like 10 to 15 different colleges. Like, why? Like, only apply to schools you really want to go to, and so, I think for me, I always gravitated towards those who are just they're gonna be a little bit more difficult, a little bit more tough, because I knew that I was gonna come away learning more than just the subject.
Well, and that point in particular was the best advice that I ever got from Sven Ronning, and very selfishly is the reason that I ended up going to college to study with him. He said, you need to go to the school where you are going to get the best education and have the best relationship with your private teacher. And I went around to a couple different schools. I went and visited Northwestern and Rice and a few other local places. But when I looked back on those lessons and also the studios that I was going to be in, and I looked at, I already have this good relationship with Dr. Ronning, and he is so left-brained and so organized, and I am so like out in the ether and discombobulated and wildly ambitious beyond my means to accomplish. And I also knew that if I chose PLU, I was going to have more opportunities to experience what it's like to be a leader, or to maybe get a solo here or there that I would have had to fight really hard for in other places. Sure. And so for that reason, my going to PLU, I got to have exactly the experience that I needed to have. And I got the most out of what I was paying for, because no matter what college you go to these days, it's expensive.
It's expensive. You are absolutely right. And all of that plays a factor into who you are as a musician, and knowing who you are as a person, which I think is incredibly important. Like, you've got to know who you are. And that's why I said earlier, college is not for everybody. You know, there are excellent community colleges, there are excellent trade schools, and we need people. I mean, we're in a global pandemic right now, right? And those are essential workers. You know, if your electricity goes out, or if you decide, hey, I love business and I want to open a grocery store, like, you're needed now more than ever. Well, you know? And you could still have a passion towards music. And
exactly. If we can turn that conversation on its head, the people who are going to go into plumbing or being an electrician or something that doesn't necessarily require a 4-year degree, we can still provide excellent experiences in music for them. And we can still get them to come to the concert hall and love music if we do it right when they're young. So talk to me about Key to Change.
Sure. Sure.
Why do we need Key to Change, and what can it do for our community?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, why do we need Key to Change? Because Key to Change is an organization that helps students through a crucial part of their development. It helps them develop not only just critical thinking or comprehension skills, but teenage years are tough. There's a lot going on. And Key to Change is an advocate for adolescence and adolescent behavior. It's an organization that uses music as the vehicle to connect with students. And through connecting with students in our program, they are learning how to become self-aware leaders. So they're learning how to engage with adults. They're learning how to present themselves on stage. They're learning how to analyze, how to write papers, because they study with the college professors, so they've got to write papers.
Oh yeah.
They're learning all of these key components that are going to help them be successful. So that's why Key to Change is important, and that's why it's needed. And it's an organization that is open to all students. So we have students of lots of different ethnicities. It's a very diverse student body. And we couple that with a very diverse board and staff, as well as the people that we bring in to do master classes and or clinics or workshops are also diverse. So, but we're doing it on an extremely high level. I think a lot of times there's a bias that if you teach students from an underserved community or a lower socioeconomic area, then you just give them the bare minimum.
That's so you hit the nail right on the head, because you only know what you grew up with. When I was teaching in Puyallup, this was, I was that teacher in the staff meeting who raised my hand and said, wait, everybody hold up. Because we are talking about this as white people who grew up in white neighborhoods in suburbia. And we are dealing with students who not all of them are in that situation. And if we're trying to come up with dynamic solutions to help things like behavior or missing work, we need to bring in people who did not grow up in the households that we did, or at least understand them better, or we need to make the effort to go out into our community and make relationships and see what's really happening at home.
That's
because
right.
if you decide that you are color blind,
Yeah.
then everybody grew up with the life that you grew up with, and that's just not the truth.
Well, the thing is that if anyone says that they're colorblind, they're lying, because
absolutely,
we all see color, and there's nothing wrong with seeing color.
I mean, red, green give me a hard time, but that's a different situation.
Well, according to my mother, we are the ones who are colorblind, not women. But
oh, okay.
But I'll just say that that our program, I think that's one of the reasons why it has been successful, is because we treat everyone the same. Everyone at some point gets their butt kicked in a lesson, and that is also coupled with love and support. And so we have a very high retention rate of students who are in our program, and we have a high level of success, and not just with playing the violin or the viola. Our students, a lot of them, I wouldn't say a lot, but some of them have had some, behavioral issues, or have had not done as well in school, and through our program have made some really significant changes in their behavior for the positive, and their grades have improved tremendously, because I'm confident it's because of the pedagogy that they're receiving in our program.
And what I see from the public school side as a public school teacher is that a lot of the kids who are having a rough time at home, where there's things going on that a young person should not have to process. And that can be as traumatic as you want to imagine, or it could just be divorce. I mean, that's even something that just for adults seems like an everyday thing that's kind of small, is a big change in a child's world.
Absolutely.
And if they don't have a way to process that is healthy, we are going to see all kinds of behaviors that are going to negatively affect that child's future. And music is one of the quickest and easiest ways to express those deep feelings that where we're processing things that a child should never have to experience. And we can relate to it, and we can relate to composers who experience those things. And composers, living composers, who are writing music about experiencing those things, especially now that we've opened up. I mean, we cracked the lid and blown the ceiling on women and people of color writing music and performing their music. And some of them are telling some really deep stories through their music. And I've already done the podcast, but I'd suggest people watching this check out the Seattle Collaborative Orchestra if you haven't already, because they are promoting some awesome music. So
I'm curious, did you ever, I want to say I remember you as a student. Did you ever play for me?
Well, so here's the story.
Okay. I don't remember if you did.
I did, but it was just a couple of lessons. And it was that Dr. Cobbs in Tacoma Youth Symphony was looking for a student who could play the Barber Concerto for the rehearsal before you came to rehearse it with us, before you played the Barber.
Did you play in the orchestra when I did the Barber Concerto?
So not only was I in the orchestra, but I was the one selected to do the first rehearsal with soloist before you.
Wow.
And then a couple weeks later, I had a couple lessons with you on Corn Gold, because that was my next piece after Barber.
Okay. I don't remember that.
Yeah, so it was 12 years ago.
Oh man, that was a long
You're like
time
29,
ago.
so how can that even be possible? 12 years ago.
Yeah. I wish.
But I do remember after you played the barber, you had some really inspiring words about how important it is that we have people like Dr. Cobbs out there crushing it. Because when I was little, I mean, Gary Locke was the governor of Washington, Asian American.
Yep.
The best conductor in my universe was an African American man. My mom was a flutist, and I didn't know, except for James Galway, I didn't know any excellent flute players that weren't, women. And then you come along and you just play the pants off of the barber.
Oh yeah.
So I grew up with no expectations about who could be in classical music. And I think every opportunity we can take to show students that there are no limits onto who can do what or who can have which job, we need to take that. And part of the conversation I had with Anna Edwards was that there are people who think that when we say diversity, that we want to take away. And it's not about taking away, it's about including. It's about drawing a bigger circle to include more people, include more music.
Yeah, but it's interesting because when you include, there can't be any ulterior motives.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, for instance, only calling on a Black musician to perform during Martin Luther King Day or Black History.
Absolutely. Yep. Oh yeah.
We're much more than a featured artist during Black History Month or a Martin Luther King celebration.
Or just throwing on with your high school students or recording a black violin because those are African American artists.
Right.
They make great music. If you're not just appreciating them because they make great music, you've got something else going on.
Yeah, and so that's where, for me, no, thank you. I'm not interested. And because I'm much more than that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I love being Black, but I think that there is I think that when people talk about wanting to diversify, they have to go deeper than just wanting to reach out to someone who is Black for Black History Month, or reach out to someone when it's, I don't know, any other ethnicities month, that's featuring people of color for just that one thing is, in my opinion, not the definition of diversity.
In a previous episode with Dr. Ryan Dudenbostel, we were talking about just like general programming for orchestras, and that a lot of times we like to put things in corners. Like, here's the Mahler Fest is the one time a year we do Mahler, or like Black History Month is the one time of the year that we do music by Black composers. Is when we put things in corners, we increase the bias and we increase the whatever ism.
And the unconscious bias.
Exactly. And so we gotta find a way to just include throughout based on merit. And that's where we're stuck kind of right now from my perspective. But you can help me out navigating that discussion.
Well, I think that representation is very important. And I think the more exposure of women composers, of people of color, I think that exposure, especially to young people, is so important, and not just doing it during, as I mentioned, during just 1 month, but real inclusion that's a part of our everyday life. It's not an event, Success is not an event. It's a race. It's something that you're or not even a race, excuse me. It's more of a marathon. It's something that you're continuing to do constantly over and over again. And I think that that's how we build true inclusion and diversity is through incorporating that into our everyday lives. We're including people who don't look like us, who have different views than us.
Yes, please.
Who have very different experiences than us into our everyday lives. I think that's really important.
And we have to be willing to have those hard conversations.
But people aren't willing to have the conversations because I think, well, I wouldn't say all people, but I think that some people don't want to have those conversations because they like their privilege. They don't want to lose that. And they don't want to feel like someone is taking something away from them by adding someone else.
Or they don't want to be told that they're wrong.
Well, there's that too.
I do want to be told I'm wrong, because if I've believed it the wrong way for 28 years, then that's a big mistake that life made for me, and I got to correct it.
Yeah, but see, this is what I was saying earlier, is you've got to know who you are. You have to know who you are, like at the core of your being, your spirit as a person. Like, who are you? What are your morals and values? What do you stand for? And what type of impact do you want to have on the world or on people who experience you? You know what I mean? So, like, for instance, you remember what happened 12 years ago. I don't. I remember coming and playing the Barber Concerto, but hearing you say that, like, that was an experience you had with me, you know, and I've moved on, and you've moved on with your lives, but that's still with you, you know? And so I think that the more that we're able to ask ourselves, what's our purpose, and how can our purpose, our personal mission, positively impact other people?
And how can we use the vehicle that is the body that we were given be used to influence whatever the change we wish to see in the world?
Absolutely. Like, just think, after we come out of this whole pandemic, like, how much cool art, great music is going to be written, painted, drawn. Just think of the amount of artistry that's going to come out of this when we're out of this pandemic cocoon.
And to have an audience to share it with.
And we will have an audience to share it with. We will have an audience to share it with. And people are going to listen differently. People are going to hear differently. And they're going to see art differently. So, like, for instance, all the art museums and that sort of thing that are closed, the concert stage, stages that are closed, the concert halls that are closed, imagine what that first note is going to sound like. When you step back on the podium with your students and you show that first downbeat, it's going to be electric.
Oh, I'm going to have myself an ugly cry. No questions asked.
But just think of the amount of creativity and sensitivity that we all are going to experience once this is over.
Absolutely.
Which, when you look at it, that this pandemic, while there is obviously a lot of just sadness right now, people losing their jobs and people are not being able to live their lives accordingly due to the tradition of how we lived it before, right? There's also, if you look at it from the other side, it's like, we will not be able to experience the creativity, and we will not be able to experience the depthness of beauty through the creation of art if we don't go through this.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all being changed right now, whether we like it or not.
Uh-huh.
Everyone in the world is impacted. Just think when we come out of this, all the cool, amazing stuff. And it's not just arts, sports. Dude, when those guys get back and the women get back on basketball courts and on the football fields and tennis, they are going to play with a passion and an electricity that they didn't have before. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
That person-to-person connection.
Man, I'm telling you.
We took it for granted for how long, and even not just the players on the field or the musicians on the stage,
everybody,
but the people in the audience, to appreciate that you are part of the group of people that are hearing this performance that as soon as it's over can never happen again.
Man, I'm telling you.
And you experience that together with the men and women around you and appreciating that experience.
Which is interesting because if you think about it, history kind of repeats itself. So when classical music, all of this stuff was created, there were no recording devices. You heard it one time and that was it.
Well, that's why there's so many repeats in some of those songs, but I skipped some of those.
But think about it from the standpoint of your Mozart conducting your piano concerto that you just performed. You're conducting, the A major, what is it, 22 or 23 piano concerto. And you're like, this is the only performance I may ever have of this music. Like,
it's like an ice sculpture. It exists just for a moment.
On for dear life to every note. And that's how I feel like, that's at least my hope, that when we come out of this, we will hold on to every note, every experience just a little bit tighter. We'll appreciate it more. We'll stop and just enjoy the experience rather than just being on our phones. You know what I mean? We'll stop and we'll appreciate
in my low moments here when I'm really missing my kids, because I have an awesome group of kids out here in Port Angeles. I mean, I've got like almost 200 students in a tiny little town, and for a lot of these kids, orchestra is like who they are. Maybe it's not what they're going to do with their career.
And that's okay.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
But it could maybe be a vehicle that gets you into college, into the career you want. But when I'm missing them, I go to the phone and I look at the recordings. But it's not as special as the memory.
No.
What the video does for me is it activates the memory.
Yeah.
I maybe watch 5 seconds and I turn it off and I can go back to that space, because we got our concert in 2 days before they closed all the schools, our last concert.
Wow.
And so I can go back to that space. When I did, I knew in that moment, this could be the last time we make music together. And that's where that memory takes. But before I start shedding some eye water here, let's talk about what you do best, which is violin. And how we could practice during this time and come out of this. And when we do play together, look at each other and say like, wow, where have you been in orchestra? And how can we be better musicians? So if you could grab your fiddle and maybe show us 2 or 3 exercises that are like kind of the foundational things that would be really simple to do, but maybe a little more tedious, that can improve our sound immensely.
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is, and I'm assuming you have students from all different levels.
Oh, yeah.
Beginners. Okay. So I'll kind of work my way up, and I'll talk about beginners first. So the first thing I would say is, when I get a new student, the first thing I do is figure out, can they read and can they count?
Uh-huh.
And I'm always amazed at the amount of students who have gone through an orchestra program. They might have started in middle school. They're in high school now, and they still don't know how to read music, and they still don't know how to count.
It happens.
It happens more than we like to admit.
And as a public school teacher, I can understand. Now, this is not something that I would let slide. There's no way I would let it slide.
Right.
But I can understand the circumstances where there's so much pressure from your life outside of school.
Oh, sure.
And pressure at school, where just like, that's one thing that you just don't have time to deal with right now.
Right.
So, I understand.
So one thing that I do is and this is something that I think kind of Terry Shade and Jeremy Wilkinson, they're really big on this, and they're both, especially Jeremy is a friend of mine, is combining pitch and rhythm together. So like, for instance, with beginners, like let's say you're trying to learn whole notes, right, and read at the same time. So I might do something like with beginner kids is talk about like, and maybe I should turn this on. There we go. A little bit more. Is combining both pitch and rhythm together. So there could be something like, if you're just even plucking, you know, you're trying to learn half notes, right? So a half note receives 2 beats. So if you're playing like a D major scale, for instance, you might play like D, and we'll call that 2, and then E4, F sharp 2, G4, A2, B4, C sharp 2, D4. So what you're doing in that is you're able to combine both pitch and rhythm together to re-emphasize what a half note is, while also reading the music. That works really well for beginners. So like if you have lightly row, E, C sharp, 4, D, B, B, 4, A, B, C sharp, D, E, E, E.
Filling up that dead space with a counting word, so that you're actually counting that space. It's not dead, it's continued tone.
That's right. And so even if you've been playing the violin or the viola or cello, bass, whatever, for a long time, that is something that I have found can be really, really helpful for students who are still struggling to understand how to read music properly. And so that's one thing that I do. Another thing that I do is, a lot of kids suffer from tension. And tension is basically the death of tone.
Yep.
And so when you're the number one reason, do you know the number one reason why students quit playing their instruments?
Well, I want to say because they think it's too hard, but it might be because it hurts.
Neither. They hate their sound.
Oh, okay.
So think about it. If you're playing and it just sounds terrible every day, you've got your little brother or sister who are like, you suck. Your dad or mom is like, can you go out in the parking lot, or can you go in the garage and practice, because that doesn't sound good. Like, you're not getting positive.
You need to make beautiful sounds. Yes.
Right. But when you have a beautiful tone, and when you really love to play your instrument because you like the sound, you're going to do it over and over and over and over again. As humans, we don't like doing things that don't feel good to us, or that we don't like to hear. We're not going to do that. So what I do is I work with my students on helping them immediately develop a really good tone.
Mm-hmm.
So the tone is, there's two aspects to it. We'll deal with the left hand first.
Uh-huh.
Left hand, one thing that I do is I talk to students about, that's so funny.
It'll pick you up since you're the one talking. Don't worry about it.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. Your violin's like half disappeared, but it's kind of cool. All right, so one thing that I do is I just ask my students, advanced students as well, is to just shake, wiggle your hand, okay? You want to have this gooey, relaxed palm here. And then I just ask students to just throw their fingers over the fingerboard, okay? Now, with your right hand, what you're gonna do is now place the fingers just on the fingerboard. That is how soft your hand and arm should be when you play.
And for the students watching that, I didn't understand that until I did it. I had to do it to understand it.
That's
so
right.
If you're watching, you got to go through and do that to understand it.
Yeah. So when you're pressing like this, right, then
screechy
you're
screech.
gonna have the tension. So I teach my students, have a soft palm here, place fingers with the right hand. And what we're going to do is lift from here, the knuckles.
Yes.
Too many times kids lift like, and then you get this kind of collapsed
pancake hand. Yeah.
Yeah, and they do that. But really what you want is soft left hand here around, and you're lifting, and you can actually take your right hand and just lift. And what you're doing is, Mr. Swede back in the day used to call this shadow boxing.
Yep.
Where you're basically just lifting here.
Now this is something if you're on an airplane or maybe you don't have an instrument at home right now that you could just do with your arm.
That's right.
I do this all the time. People think I'm a weirdo, and I am, but I'm also practicing violin.
Yeah, you can totally do that. The same with the bow as well. So you want to make sure that when you're using your bow, you can take your left hand here, or you can take a pencil, whichever, and just throw the fingers over. And you want to just check to make sure that the fingers are nice and relaxed. Now, I get a lot of questions about the thumb. So the thumb should...
Yeah, that's the hard one.
That's the hard one. I like to touch here, touch to make sure, again, it feels like Play-Doh. It's gooey, it's squishy here, because the thumb needs to be able to move. And so once your fingers are all nice and relaxed, then you're able to actually place this on the string. Now, what I do with my students, I call them frog leaps, where we'll start with the frog, and then we'll lift and go to the middle.
We do this all the time, and my kids hate it, but we're going to keep doing it.
And we do it at the tip.
Yep.
And then we do it here at the middle, and we do it here at the frog. And what you want to do is make sure that you have that your bow is parallel to the bridge. So if your bow is like this or your bow is like that, it's not necessarily parallel. And all the while, you want to make sure that your fingers are nice and relaxed. Now, what I tell my kids, I always start them with the pencil first as a warm-up, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So if we're trying to change your bow hand and that sort of thing, we're going to do it here. And the whole purpose is just to lift and, of course, make sure that all the fingers are nice and relaxed. Now, and then I also, of course, do these types of exercises.
Oh, yeah. This is my students know this is octopus hand.
Yeah, moving it back and forth. But what you want is, what I tell my kids is, if the bow feels heavy at the frog, you know you're doing it right. If it's not heavy here at the frog, then you're doing it wrong. And the reason why is because you want to make sure that you have the weight at the frog. So you'll hear the sound resonate. And
well, and your pinky's the only thing holding up the tip of the bow if you're doing it right.
Correct. Well, although what I like to do is I like to focus a lot on the two middle fingers as well, because the two middle fingers can actually help provide more power for you.
Oh, yes,
Rather than pressing, you want to be able to have that flexibility in the finger.
And those middle fingers allow our pinky and pointer finger to have that reciprocal relationship. Because these are the guys that stay the same, whether we're in this position or in that position.
That's correct. That's correct. So those are things that I think anyone can learn. I do a lot of different bow exercises. So I talk a lot about making sure that your arm is on the right string level. So like if you're supposed to be on the A string, or let's say D string, just for the sake, but you're like this.
The T-Rex arm, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to make sure that you bring your arm up to the right string level, because that will happen if you don't. So making sure that you're on the right string, that your arm is on the right string level will help you a lot.
Now, I've got a special request for something that my students struggle with all the time. And you and I both know it's something that is easy once you've done it enough times, but playing up high on the E string and getting a good sound. How can we get a good sound up high on the E string? And not even like, I mean, high to my students is like third position. So
the first thing is, if you're playing up high on, let's say, in third position. So one thing that, and this is this comes from Yost, is
I love those.
Yeah, understanding how to actually get, when you're shifting, a lot of students, I'll say, don't understand that you're shifting positions.
Your whole hand.
You're shifting from first to third position. So a lot of people just think, oh, I need to go from F sharp to A.
No.
So you've got to understand how to get to A. In third position. You've got to be able to shift positions. So let's talk about if we're going from first to third position. So one thing that you could do is, first, a lot of times when you're shifting, kids don't know the correct pitches that they're going to. So let's say we're going to third position. So first thing is, we're on the E string, F sharp to A. Well, we need to know what F sharp and A sound like. So let's practice that first in first position. So we've got F sharp. We're gonna place that G sharp there in the middle. We're gonna just as kind of a filler for our sandwich. So we've got basically F sharp and A, okay? So in order to get to A, we're gonna play that G sharp. All right? Now, once we've done that a couple of times, then we can move on. Here's step 2. We're gonna still do that G sharp in the middle. We're gonna go F sharp. Now we're gonna slide to A. Then we're gonna come back, okay? Now, when we shift up, we're gonna shift or slide with 1. And
that's the Yost exercise right there.
Okay?
Yep.
Finally, after we've done that step a few times, now we're ready for the shift. Oh, sorry. All right. Now we're ready for that. Now we've completed steps 1 through 3. The thing that you have to be most aware of when you're shifting is the thumb. You don't want to look like a hitchhiker where your thumb is way back here and your fingers are way back here. Because if you try to, it's just impossible. So you want to practice just moving. And if I turned around this way.
And it's a really gentle movement, I can see. You're not pinching the neck as you're.
Not at all.
It's almost like a little bubble when you shift.
That's right. It's just this back and forth. The tendency is to squeeze the thumb. So if you squeeze the thumb, you're going to have problems, all right? Yep. And you won't be able to shift properly. The second thing that a lot of people don't talk about is your nails might be too long. So you've got to make sure that if you're just starting shifting and you already have a problem clipping your nails, I strongly suggest that you.
Or if Mr. Rodall gets mad at you for your intonation in higher position, check out your nail situation, because chances are I've asked you 4 times already this week. Well, I hate to cut it short there, but I think we are just about out of time, and we have covered so much ground. And thank you so much for having, not that I was expecting to have it, but kind of one of those hard conversations that people need to have about diversity and inclusion and what that really needs to look like.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. This was a pleasure, and I hope that I was able to provide your students with some value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got like 2 more questions off camera, but we're going to go ahead and say goodbye to all the listeners and viewers now. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.